Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back from your travels. To those who are present and those who are online, it is good to see you. I don't know why we just lost why did we just lose the, okay, I'm sorry, we just lost the share option. What happened there? Okay, I'm sorry. Just when I thought we had everything, let me get the sheets back on the screen. I'm
It's
sorry.
there. I see it.
You see it?
Yeah.
Okay, why on my computer it wasn't there? Okay.
Now I don't see it.
Okay, so I'm sorry. Give me 1 second and we'll get it back up. Sorry about that. Okay, it should be there. Is it there?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you're well. Today is Wednesday. It is the 9th. It is the 9th of July. We're getting ready for Parshas Balak. I want to share some sources with you on Parshas Balak that I think are going to make the Parsha much more meaningful. Today, we're going to start by jumping into some Jewish history, and we're going to examine a little bit about the life of someone whose works we quote here very often. We're going to find out a little bit more about him. We're also going to find out more, actually, I would say about two of the people we quote here somewhat often. And I was able to corroborate, as you'll soon see, I was able to corroborate something a historical detail that I was not aware of before. I was able to corroborate that here, and I want to share that with you. So someone who we quote quite often is Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein. Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein was the author. He's best known for being the author of the Torah Tamima, but he also wrote a commentary later in life on Chumash called Tosefes Bracha, and he was a son of the Aruch HaShulchan, who was Rabbi Yechiel Michal Halevi Epstein. So that was the Aruch HaShulchan. This was his son, Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein. So let's just see. Here's a brief bio of him I found online. You see there where he was born in 1860, passed away in 1941, was a Lithuanian rabbi. Best known for his Torah Tamima commentary on the Torah, he was a son of Rabbi Yechiel Michal Epstein, rabbi of Nevardik and author of the Aruch HaShulchan. Epstein grew up in Nevardik, where his father was the communal rabbi, but moved to the city of Pinsk after his marriage to the daughter of Rabbi Elazar Moshe Horowitz, and lived there until his death, apart from a period of 23 to 26, which he spent in the United States looking unsuccessfully for a rabbinic position. During this period, he served as the first Minahel, the director of Ezras Torah. It's still around, a very famous tzedakah organization, from around 1924 until he was succeeded by the very famous Rav Henkin, Rav Yosef Eliyahu Henkin, about the year 1925. Although Epstein was a bookkeeper or an accountant by profession, he had been a student at the Volozhin Yeshiva under his uncle, the famous Nitziv, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who later became his brother-in-law after being widowed and remarrying Epstein's sister. So he was both his uncle and his brother-in-law. Epstein authored a number of popular and scholarly works which are still used today. Again, one that we often quote is Tosefes Bracha. Now look at this last line. I have not seen this elsewhere. During the Nazi occupation of Pinsk, again, Pinsk was kind of at the border of Russia/Lithuania. During the Nazi occupation of Pinsk, the Jewish hospital where Rabbi Epstein was a patient was burned down and he perished in the fire. So he was killed by the Nazis in a terrible manner. Just imagine that, being burnt alive in a fire in a hospital, being immobile. Absolutely awful. I hadn't seen that elsewhere because when you look at his Sfarim, again, the Sfarim that were published when he was still alive, it doesn't mention that, obviously, because he published them when he was alive. And I was not aware of that detail elsewhere, but you're going to see something today that we're going to learn together that's going to corroborate that. Now, another person that we oftentimes quote here is the Aznaim LaTorah, who we're going to be quoting from today as well. And again, there you see a picture of him with a picture. It says Rabbi Zalman Saratskin. He was also known as the Lutzker Rav, because that was the town Lutsk where he was the rabbi. And again, you see he lived from 1881 to 1966. So he was about 20 years younger than Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein. And he also lived 20 years longer. He was a famous Orthodox rabbi, served as a rabbi of Lutsk in the Ukraine, and again he got out of Europe before the Holocaust, made it to Israel, and he was very responsible in Israel with helping set up a number of schools, yeshivas, and stuff after the Holocaust. Now, we're going to get into some of Rabbi Sorotskin's family here, and I'm doing this just so we'll see because he's going to quote someone. I want it to be clear who it is that he's quoting. So Rabbi Sorotskin has a sister in his family. Her name was Rachel, and there's a picture of her. Her married name was Walken. So her name was Rachel Walken. And you see there, they don't know exactly when she was born. She was born somewhere between 1860 and 1892. That's a very large range. But she was younger. I'm sorry, she was probably older than Rabbi Zalman Sorotskin. And again, you see there what's important that I have bolded. Her husband was a rabbi. His name was Aaron Walken. He was the rabbi of Pinsk. Again, remember we said Baruch Halevi Epstein lived in Pinsk and died in Pinsk. You're going to see why he was, I guess, very close confidant of the larger Sorotskin family, because Rav Zalman Sorotskin had a brother named Rav Aaron Walken, who was married to his sister. I'm sorry, brother-in-law Aaron Walken was married to his sister Rachel, and they lived in Pinsk. Aaron was the head rabbi of Pinsk. And Aaron had a son, there's a picture of him on the bottom there, whose name was Reb Shmuel David Walken, again, lived in Pinsk. He survived, made it to America, and you can see there he actually died in Queens in 1979. And he was the son of Aaron Walken and Rachel Walken. So that would mean that this Shmuel David Walken that you see there is a nephew of Rabbi Sorotskin. Because we're going to see that Rabbi Sorotskin is going to quote his nephew. His nephew, he calls him Ben Achosi, the son of my sister, which means his nephew. And he's just going to use an acronym. And I had to do a little digging just to figure out who this was. It all becomes clear. And now you can see pictures of who these all are, who all these people are. Okay, that's our introduction. Let's jump into the Dvar Torah now. We're on page 2. So we're familiar with the story in Parshas Balak. So Balak is a king. He's living in Israel. He's the king of Moab. He's living in Israel, and he's very nervous as he sees the Jewish people starting to approach, getting closer and closer to the land of Israel. He's very nervous that the Jewish people are going to come through and attack him. So he hires this mercenary prophet. He hires Bilam to come and curse the Jewish people. And we know that he tries, he wants to, but he knows that he can't disobey whatever it is that God, the words that God puts in his mouth. And whereas he wanted to curse Israel with all of his might, God would not allow him to do so. And he ends up giving blessings to the Jewish people, whereupon he is sent home. And before he leaves, he gives one last bit of advice to the Moabites, which is if you really want to get God against the Jewish people, he hates licentiousness, he hates immorality. So therefore, if you get your daughters to go out and cavort with them and get them to be immoral with them, that'll turn God against them. And we see that's what happens at the end of the Parsha. So Bilam, while he's not successful at cursing the Jewish people, he was successful at offering some advice, which could bring about a downfall of, I believe the number at the end of people who die in the plague was about 24,000. So he does cause a lot of damage in a different manner. Okay, so when Bilam first shows up, Balak, who's the king who has hired him as this mercenary prophet, he says, come, I want you to look. They're up in, to take a step back, I'm always fascinated with this Parsha, because this Parsha is so different than the rest of the Torah. The rest of the Torah from the time Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are introduced is all revolving around the Jewish people and our ancestors. This is like where we basically imagine if you were watching a film, I don't know, imagine you're watching a film about World War II, and it's always revolving around the American army and their advance through Europe. Now imagine the director says, he takes the camera and takes it into the enemy camp and says, basically, we're going to like veer from our normal programming, whereas until now we've always been centered around the U.S. forces. Now we're going to take our film into the Nazi camp and show you what's going on behind the enemy lines. In a certain sense, that's what happens in Parshas Balak, because we have no idea what's going on. We didn't have any Jewish witnesses who were present when Bilam and Balak were speaking. We don't know anything about those conversations. However, God, he's the all-knowing, all-seeing, and God saw what happened and reports to Moshe, this is what you're supposed to record in the Torah. So in a sense, it's like the camera panned out, left the Machne Yisrael, left the Jewish camp, goes into the domain of Bilam and Balak, records all this conversation, and now that's what we're watching, and that's what we're reading about. That's what plays itself out in Parshas Balak. I just always found that fascinating, how this is such a different perspective. So here we go. So what Balak does when Bilam first shows up is he says, they have the high ground, and he says, come, I want to take you to different vantage points where you could look out, look upon the Jewish people, and now do me a favor and curse them for me. So I saw that, you'll see here in the Aznaim Torah, he says, let's see where he's going on this pasuk. He just happens to be going on this pasuk. He could have gone on any number of them. So the pasuk is Yud Gimel and Perek Chaf Gimel. So it's chapter 23, verse 13. Vayomer elav Balak. Balak says to Bilam, L'chana yiti, come along with me, al makom acher. There's the first spot where I had you looking out at the Jewish people and I wanted you to curse them. That didn't work out. So come along with me to a different spot. Asher tirenu misham, and from there you'll be able to see the Jewish people. Efes katseu, you'll see part of them. Tiraz, part of them you'll see, but chulolo tira. But the vantage point I want to take you to, you won't see the entirety of the Jewish people, but you'll see a good chunk, and you'll get a feel for this big swarming menace that I see coming my way. But kavno li misham, and I want you to try to curse them from there. And this goes on a couple times, 3 times. He takes them to different vantage points where he's hoping Bilam will get a good look at the Jewish people from different angles, and he'll be able to curse them. That's what's going on in the Psukim. So we're going to see the Aznayim LaTorah. We're on page 2 in the Aznayim LaTorah. Let's see what Rav Zalman Sorotzkin does here. Hikshali, the question was asked to me, Hagon Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein. He says, the great sage Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein, who again, we saw the brief bio on page 1, that's the author of the Torah Timima, also wrote Tosefet's Bracha. He says, I was asked a great question by Rabbi Epstein. Now, look what he throws in those 3 letters, that acronym, Hey Yud Daled. You know what Hey Yud Daled stands for? Hashem Yikom Damav. That is an appellation that's always used for who? For someone who was killed al Kiddush Hashem, someone who was a martyr. Very rarely have I don't know if I've ever, until this point, seen those 3 letters used after the name of Baruch Halevi Epstein. What does that do? That corroborates what we saw on page 1 in his biography. I hadn't seen that last line in the biography about Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein. It says there that during the Nazi occupation of Pinsk, the Jewish hospital where Rabbi Epstein was a patient was burned down and he perished in the fire. He was burned to death by the Nazis. And again, I'd never seen that detail before. With these 3 letters, that's corroborated. Because what do you see? He's saying Hashem Yikom Damav after he says Baruch Halevi Epstein means he was killed al Kiddush Hashem. He was killed. He was martyred. He was killed for the fact that he was Jewish by the Nazis. It's not something that I was familiar with. So he says Baruch Halevi Epstein from Pinsk again, because that's where he lived. He says, and we're going to see soon that Rav Sorotzkin, he has got a lot of family in Pinsk, because we saw his sister Rachel lived in Pinsk. She was married to Aaron Walken, who was the chief rabbi of Pinsk, and they got a son, Shmuel David. We're going to see who he's going to quote at the end of this piece. So he says, Hikshali Agon Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein Hashem Yikom Damav mi Pinsk. I was asked this tremendous question by Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein of Pinsk. Lama Chazar Balak acharei makom zeh o acher. Why is Balak giving Bilam this tour? Come with me to spot A and look out at the Jewish people. Try to curse them from there. Come with me to spot B. Oh, it didn't work at A? Come with maybe from spot B you'll get him. Oh, that didn't work? Let's go to spot C. Why is he taking him to specific places to go look at it and curse them? Acharei makom shiro efes katseu. He's taking a place where you'll see some of them, all of them. And then I want you to, he takes them at another spot where they'll see the Jewish people who are encamped according to their tribes. If Bilam's entire power is that he was able to figure out the exact moment that God was so upset at the Jewish people, Bilam could do his job whether he's looking out and seeing the Jewish people or if he doesn't see the Jewish people. What difference does it make if Bilam sees part of the Jewish people, sees all of the Jewish people? Let's just hit the pause button here for a second, because without telling us, he's referencing a Gemara, an important Gemara in Maseches Brachos here that I want to share with you. And that Gemara is on the bottom of page 2. Let's just take a pause and let's see the Gemara. The Gemara says, "Umi ika riska kamei de kudshabrichu." Does God have a sense of anger? Does he get angry with the Jewish people? So the Gemara says, absolutely. The Tanya we learned in a brisa, "Ve'el zoam b'chol ve'kel zoam b'chol yom," that it says that yeah, there are times in the day where God does get quite upset. The kama zamo, when God does get upset at the Jewish people. How long does that last? Kama, how long is Amo? How long does his wrath last for? Gemara answers Rega, just for a moment. Kama Rega, okay, but speaking practically, how long is a Rega? So the Gemara says, Echad, it's one portion of Mechameshes Ribo Ushmones Alafim Ushmona Meos Ushmonim Ushmona Bisha. A tiny moment. I had to just put on the translation so you get just how significant, how look on the next page. This is from Safari. I believe this is the Steinsaltz translation. How much time does his anger last? God's anger lasts a moment. How long is a moment? 158,888 of an hour. That is a moment. Okay, that is a minuscule amount of time. The Gemara adds, and no creature can precisely determine that moment when God becomes angry, except for Bilam the wicked, about whom it was written, he knows the knowledge of the Most High. So let's go back to our Gemara. So the Gemara says, Kama Rega, how long is that moment that God's upset? So this incredibly short amount of time, Zui Rega. I'm on the end of the second line there. Ve'ein kol beria yacholu lechaven o sosha, and there is no, I'm sorry, those online, I'm on the bottom of that page here. It says, and there is no human being was able to calculate when exactly is that moment in time that God's upset each day. Chutz mi Bilam Arasha. That was the power that Bilam had. He had some kind of like a detector that he could figure out when exactly God was upset. The Chsiv Bey, because it says about Bilam, it says in the Parsha, V'yodea das elyon, that he knows the mindset of he that is on most high, meaning God. So that was Bilam's entire power, is he somehow was able to have a finger on the pulse to know that exact moment, a tiny, tiny moment that God was upset. And at that moment, if he would utter a curse against the Jewish people, against any people that God's upset with, he could tap into that anger and be successful. That was the whole skill that Bilam had. He knows about to be able to figure out when God was upset, the moment he's upset at any nation, and if he would utter a curse at that exact moment, it could be effective. That was the extent of Bilam's power, according to the Gemara. So now the Gemara questions this. Gemara says, I don't get that. Hashda das behem tolo haviyada. He doesn't know his own donkey, because the pasuk tells us that he couldn't figure out why his donkey was taking these turns and running him into the wall, because the donkey saw the angel with the sword. He can't figure out his own donkey. Das elyon haviyada. You're telling me he could figure out God's mindset? He can't figure out a donkey. So Gemara says, Elam alamed. What does it mean? Of course, he has no way, he's not able to figure out God's mindset. He had one skill that he was able to basically tap into, his radar would go off, that when it was that one moment that God was upset at whatever nation, somehow God gave him the gift. That's what his one skill he was able to tap into. This is what the Navi Micha that we're going to read in the Haftorah this week. This is what he says to the Jewish people. Ami, my people, Zecharna ma ya'atz Balak melech Moab. You should know what was the advice that Balak, the king of Moab, gave to Bilam, that he hired him to curse you. My leman das tzidkos Hashem, and then the pasuk goes on to say that, but God in His righteousness, because He loves you so much, He didn't allow it to succeed. What does that mean? Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Lama Kadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, that God was saying to Israel through Micha, "Do kama tzidakos asisi machem." You should know how many righteous deeds I did for you. Shalo ka'asti b'yamai b'imei bilam arasha. So even though there is this minuscule moment in the day where I could get upset at different nations, the whole time that Bilam was together with Balak and he was trying to conspire against you, I made sure not to get upset during that time. That's the favor I did for you. Because if I would have gotten upset for that one moment, lo yishtair misoneim shal Yisrael sarid. Not one remnant of the enemies of Israel, which is a euphemism for Israel, would have remained, meaning Bilam would have been effective. Had I gotten upset with you for that one moment, then Bilam would have been upset with you. Then Bilam would have been successful. So what Micha, the Navi, is telling us in Haftarah this week is, remember how much God loves you? He made sure that entire visit that Bilam was with Balak, he made sure not to be upset with you, because if he had, Bilam would have been able to detect it, and boom, he would have gotten in. He would have swept in for the kill. And this is what Bilam tells Balak. My kov, la kov kel. What can I curse? What God doesn't curse. My azam lo zam Hashem. How can I be angry when God's not angry? Melamed shekol oso hayamim lo zam. Tells us that that entire period of days that Bilam and Balak were hanging out, God did us a favor that he didn't get upset. So that's the way the Gemara's account of what happened here is that Bilam's entire power was that Bilam was able to sense the moment God was upset with any nation, and if he could jump in at that exact moment, right then, boom, he could get them knocked off. And God, his chesed he did for us is he made sure not to get upset during that period of time. Okay, back to Rav Sorotzkin. So Rav Sorotzkin is saying that Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein asked the following question. What's going on here? If the entire power of Bilam is that Bilam knows when to swoop in for the strike because he can sense when God's upset, so what does he have to see the Jewish people? Balak is taking him, come, maybe get from this vantage point, that vantage point. He doesn't have to see them. His entire modus operandi is that he's able to detect when God's upset in Am Yisrael, and at that moment sweep in, issue a curse, and boom, he doesn't have to see them to do this. So why is Balak saying maybe we'll be successful if you see him from here, be successful if you see him from there? That's Reb Baruch Halevi Epstein's question. Okay, so we're back up in the Aznaim LaTorah. In the first column, we're about 8 lines from the bottom, after the question mark. The Amarti. So Rav Sorotzkin says, here's what I responded. By the way, let's just cut to the chase here. At the last line in the second column, he says, it's not me. This was all his nephew. You see, he says, Kol zeh mipik savo shel ben achosi. Everything I just reported here, this was a written account, meaning he got a letter from his nephew. Ben Achosi means my nephew. Hagon Reb, this I had to look it up. That's Reb Shmuel David Volkin Shlita. Rabbi Shmuel, that was on page 1. Remember, we went through this whole family tree. Rabbi Sorotzkin had his sister Rachel, who was married to Rabbi Aaron, the chief Rabbi Pinsk, who had a son Shmuel David. So Shmuel, it's not that Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein had this conversation with me, Rabbi Sorotzkin. He was living in Pinsk. My nephew was in Pinsk. My nephew wrote me this letter. Here's this great question that Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein had, and here's what I answered. The I is not Rabbi Sorotzkin, it's his nephew, Rav Shmuel David Walken. And he just gives some detail. Hagona based in Lukach, who went on, after he grew up and left Pinsk, he went on to serve in a European community called Lukach, and now, meaning after the Holocaust, to Brooklyn. Now he lives in Brooklyn, and as we saw on page 1, he died in Queens. So what he's about to report here, this conversation, it's not between him and Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein, it was between Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein and his nephew, Rabbi Shmuel David Walken. Okay, so again, just putting this all in perspective, and what we got from this is that it corroborates what we saw, that Hashem Yikom Damav, that he was a martyr, meaning that now we see some corroboration that Rabbi Epstein unfortunately was killed by the Nazis, something again we weren't aware of. So let's see again, we're about 8 lines up in that first column. So he says, Amarti, so I answered as follows. Again, the I is not Rabbi Sorotzkin, it's his nephew. Amarti al Pia Amor. He goes, he had a very clever answer, how he answered Rabbi Epstein. He said as follows, V'marti al pi amor, I answered as follows, Hamavakesh rachamim al chavero, if let's say someone is praying for the good, he's asking God, have mercy on my friend, ein sarach lahazkir shemo, you don't even have to say the name. How do we know this? Shneamar, because it said, and this was at the end of Parshas, I believe it was Baaloscha, kel na rafan Allah. After Miriam and Aaron spoke ill about Moshe, she was stricken with saras, and Moshe davened for her. That was the shortest prayer you've ever heard. Kel na, God please, rafana la, please heal her. 5 words. That's all Moshe said to cure Miriam. Did he ever say Miriam? Miriam Bas Yocheved, like he made a Mishaberach for her? He never said her name. He said, Kel na, rafana la, God please heal her. That's what he said. So he says as follows. He goes, we know if you're begging for mercy to God for your friend, you do not need to mention the name. Shenamar, how do we know that? Because it says, Kelna Rafan Allah. Moshe said, God, please heal her. He never mentioned Miriam's name. Umakshim, then they ask on this, the commentaries ask in the Gemara, Mehadisa Bezorah Kodesh. But the Zohar seems to say in Vayishlach, when Yaakov was davening to Hashem to help him and protect him from Esav, he said, Hatzileni no miyad achi, save me from my brother, miyad Esav. He did mention Esav. So if you saw from Moshe that you don't have to say the name, so then why does Yaakov say Miyad Achi Miyad Esav? Mikan Raya Shemispalo Boilu Farish Milan Kirkayos. It seems from that Zohar makes the point that when you daven, you should try to spell things out. So what is it? Do I got to spell things out, or do I not have to spell them out? The Kasav Alzeh Maril, and the Maril is one of the early Ashkenazic Rishonim, he resolves this contradiction. You know what he says? Sheyesh l'chalak. There's a difference. We're on the top of the second column. He says there is a difference. Bein b'fanav, bein shalom b'fanav. It makes a difference. Is the party that you're davening about standing right in front of you? If the parties that you're davening about is standing right in front of you, do you need to mention the name? No, because God knows who you're talking about. If the party's not in front of you, now you got to mention the name. You got to clarify. So in Moshe's case, where he's asking God, Kel Narafan Allah. Was Miriam there? Yeah. So did he have to say Miriam's name? No. When Yaakov's davening to Hashem, help me, protect me from my brother, is his brother standing right there? No. So he's got to say Esav. That's the way the Maril wants to do this. So he says, Sheyesh l'chalak bein b'fanav and shalom b'fanav. Shemoshe yispal ala Miriam b'faneh. Moshe was davening about Miriam in front of her face. Amar Stam, so he just said on his own, Rifan Allah, Vidayo. That was enough. He didn't have to say her name because she's standing right there. Aval Yaakov, she spoke Shalom b'fnei Esav. But Yaakov was asking God for mercy, and he's not standing in front of Esav. Hayat Sarich lefaret. He had to specify Miyad Achi Miyad Esav. Now he had to specify that. So it goes, that's the first building block. One more building block. Let's take a pause for a second. Let's turn to page 3. We learned together the Gemara in Brachos that said that Bilam's entire skill was that he knew how to detect the exact moment, tiny little moment, minuscule moment where God was upset, and he could issue a curse at that time. So look what Tosos says. I've got this right after that translation of the Gemara on the top of page 3. This is Tosos says, "She'ulmale ka'asti lo nishtayer." God says, if I would have gotten upset at you, and for that one moment, not one Jew would have been able to survive because Bilam would have pounced with this curse. So the Tosos asks, Bim Tomar, I'll ask you a question. Maya yachol lomar b'shas rega. What could Bilam possibly have said? Once we know that rega, a moment, means that it was 158,888th of an hour. That's a tiny. What could Bilam have said during that time? So Tosas' first answer was Yesh Lomar. What could he have said? Kalem. All he had to say was one word. Kalem means obliterate them. All he had to say was, it didn't have to be a long, rambling speech. According to Tosas, all he had to say was one word. Obliterate them. And if he would have snuck in that one word at that one moment, boom, our goose is cooked. Okay, let's go back to Rabbi Sorotskin on page 2. So again, he's quoting his nephew. So he said there's 2 building blocks to answer Rabbi Epstein's question. He says building block number 1 is what? Is that when someone is b'fanav, when they're before you, you don't have to mention their name. When they're shalom b'fanav, when they're not before you, you do have to mention their name. Now he says we're on about the 6th line. V'hinei Tosos divrei maschel ilmalei. Tosos that we just saw ilmalei. Hikshu asks the question. Ma yevshar lo labilam l'kalelas Yisrael berega k'memra. What could Bilam possibly have said in that very, very small, minuscule window of opportunity? Sharizamo Rega, that it's because the Gemara said that God's anger only lasted for a brief moment, and it defined it as being a tiny moment. The Tirates, Tosas' first answer was, Shef Shar Hayilo Lomar Kalem. He could have just said, knock them off, obliterate them. So now he says as follows. I have an answer to Rabbi Epstein's question. Lefize Mevuar Shapir. I could explain everything. Lama Chazar Bilam Achar Makom. You know why Balak was taking Bilam? I want you to see the Jewish people. I'm taking you to various places. Remember, he started with the question, why did he have to see them? He could have cursed them from anywhere. He says, no. I want you to see them. What advantage does he have if he sees them? Exactly. If they're right in front of him, you don't have to say the name. And what do we know? He's got how much of a window of an opportunity to get in a curse? Tiny. So if he sees them, now all he has to say is Kalem, and he doesn't have to identify them. What if he doesn't see the Jewish people? Will that one word Kalem be enough? No, because now he'll have to identify them. That's what he's going to say here. So he says, Lafisa before Shapir. So now it makes sense. Lama Chazar Bila Machar Makom. Why is he taking him to a specific place? Sheyira Mishamas Yisrael, where he can see the Jewish people. Kiyaz Ein Sarach Lasker Shem Yisrael. Because if he sees them, now he won't have to say the name of Israel. V'dai lo lomar Kalem. All he'll have to say is that one tiny three-letter word Kalem. Obliterate them. But if he would be at a spot where he doesn't see, can't take them in with his eyes, Allah Lasker a shame. Then he would have to mention their name. But he wouldn't have enough time. He wouldn't have enough time to get in a good curse. He's going to say Kalem li Yisrael. That's too much time. He can't get that in. Shari Rak Rega Bapo, because he's got this tiny, tiny window of opportunity. So he says that's how he answered Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein's question. Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein wanted to know, why is it so important to Balak that he's taking him to spots where he can see the Jewish people? If he's such a good cursor, let him curse from anywhere. No, because he's got this tiny window of opportunity. It's minuscule. And you got to get in that curse. And what do we know? That it has to fit in that tiny amount of time. And the only way he could get in just the word kalem that Tosa said is if they're b'fanav, if he sees them. Because if they're not b'fanav, then you're going to have to mention their name. And if you're going to mention their name, you need more time. He doesn't have that time. So that's how he wants to say, that's how this great question that he heard in the name of Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein, and he says his nephew, because he got this in testimony from his nephew, that's that last line, Kol zemi pi ksavo, I got this in a letter, Shel ben Achosi, from my sister's son, meaning his nephew, Hagon Shmuel David Volkin, who was Rav Shmuel David Walking. He goes, what a beautiful, and he goes, I have to record this. And he put this in his Aznaim Torah. That's what he did. Now, here's what, everyone got that? Isn't that interesting? Now, here's where I want to go with you. I shared with you on page 3, Tosfos, and he mentioned Tosfos in here. Tosfos had a question. Tosfos' question was, if there's such a small window of opportunity, what kind of damage could you possibly do in that small window of opportunity? And Tosfos' first answer was, all you had to get in was one word, kalem. But Tosfos does give a second answer. Let's look at that together. We're on the top of page 3. Tosfos' second answer, at the end of that line, inami, here's the second answer. As long as you can begin your curse during that window of opportunity, it could have been, it didn't have to be so short. It didn't have to just be kalem. It could have been a longer curse. But as long as you got your foot in the door, imagine like the door's open for a second and you got your foot in the door. As long as you got your foot in the door, even though the curse takes longer to get out, as long as you got your foot in the door, you're keeping the door open, now you'll let the curse get out. Now we got a problem because it comes out everything he just reported from his nephew's very clever answer to Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein will only work in Tosfos' first answer. First answer was, yeah, he's got to get in kalem. So kalem, in order to get kalem, it's got to be b'fanav, so he has to see them. But Tosfos' second answer is it could have been a much longer curse, as long as he started it in that rega. As long as he got his foot in the door, it could have been a much longer curse. If it could have been a much longer curse, so now we're back to the drawing board. Why did he have to see them? Why was it so according, in other words, what are we going to say? That you've only got an answer to Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein according to Tosfos' first answer, but you don't have an answer according to the second answer? That's what was bothering me. And then I decided, you know what? Just for the heck of it, let me look it up in Tosefes Bracha. The same way that Rabbi Sorotskin's nephew wrote to him saying that Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein had this great question that he asked me, and here's what I answered him. Maybe Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein himself recorded this, and let's see what he did. So I looked it up, and bingo, we found it. So here on page 3, there's the Tosefes Bracha. That's Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein himself recording the question. And you see there, he brings it down on a different pasuk. Gaznaim Latorah, Sorotskin brought it down on pasuk Yud Gimel. He brings it down on pasuk Vav, where it says, L'cha na'ar aliyah samazeh, because that's the beginning of the conversation. And he says Now here you go. You have Balak leading Bilam around, and he's trying to get him, bring him to a spot where he can see the Jewish people to curse him. So he asks this question, and you know what? He gives this answer. He brings down, he records the exact answer that Shmuel David Walken told him that that's not recorded. He doesn't record it in his name though. He makes it sound as if like, okay, he just says V'efsher lefaresh al derech drash. That's what he says. He goes, you can answer this in a very homiletic way, and he doesn't say this is what Shmuel David Walken told me, but he brings down that answer. I thought that's fascinating. But let's go to the final page, and there's no reason to reread it because he says that's exactly what he brings down is exactly what Shmuel David Walken suggested. Look where I have the finger. That paragraph. Omnam. Here he's bothered by our question. He says there's one problem with what Shmuel David Walken said. Hatosos bebracha sham kasvu. The Tosos there wrote Od teretz. A second answer al kushiyasam on a question. What damage could Bilam possibly have done in that one moment? Because and what did Tosos write? As long as you start your curse, at the time that God's upset, it'll do damage even though the curse continues going. Because again, you got your foot in the door, so it's like you got a door jam in there. You're keeping the door open, so it can be a longer curse too. So he goes, according to this is what we were just asking. I was so excited to see this. He's on the ball. He says, Lafi Teretzeh, Tashuva Kosha. Now the questions, we're back to the drawing board. Lama Yisrael Balak Kol Kach Laviu Lamakom Mishkan Yisrael. Why is he trying so hard to bring them to a place where the Jewish people are encamped, that he could see them? Let him curse him wherever he is. Why does he got to come there to see them and for them to be befanav? I understand why you got to be befanav according to Tosas's first answer. The first answer is the entire curse has to happen in the Rega. So the only way an entire curse can happen in the Rega is if the curse is really short. It's got to just be Kalem, but you can only get away with Kalem if you don't have to name them. The only time you don't have to name them is if they're befanav, if they're in front of you. Very clever answer, but that only works according to Tosfos' first answer. That's what's bothering us. And I was so excited. So here he is. He's bothered by our question. According to Tosfos' second answer, it could be a much longer curse. So why do they have to be in front of him? That's exactly what we're bothered by. So let's see what here Baruch Halevi Epstein does himself in this next little small paragraph. The Efsher Lomar. Here's what you can possibly say. Alpia Mishnah Ba'avos Parakeh Mishnah Yutes. In Pirkei Avos, chapter 5, Mishnah 19, the Mishnah clearly says there, the Bilam Haya Ra Ayin. It says that Bilam had an Ayin Ra. It says we want to be like the Talmidim of Avram Avinu who have an Ayin Tova, not like Bilam who had an Ayin Ra. He had a nasty eye, which I always read that. I must have seen a commentary say that we have a choice. How do we want to see the world around us? Do we want to see all the negativity that's out there? We want to focus on all the negative, or we want to focus on the positive? And it takes a real effort to focus on the positive because it's not so easy sometimes. But it takes an effort. We can do it if we try hard. But Bilam would only see the negative. That's how I always read that. He's going to take it a little differently. He says, Muvur biyoser bezohar. Apparently the Zohar explains this, explaining what does it mean that he had a jaundiced eye, he had a really negative perception. Shekol kocho haya be'eno. Bilam's entire power of cursing, he had this nasty eye that what he would set his eyes upon, that's what his cursing would fall upon. In other words, he couldn't just be sitting home in his little hovel, wherever it was, in Midian, and say, I want to curse the Jews. Unless he's there visually seeing them, unless he's actually seeing them, it's just not going to be effective. The power of Bilam's curse had to do with this nastiness of him looking upon them. And of anything he said his nasty eyes upon Hayamazik, he was able to do damage too. Therefore, Hayatzarech Liyos El Makom Alamakom Sheira Shames Mishkanam Shal Yisrael V'yiten Enabav. Balak knew this. Balak knows that Bilam's entire power, it's not that he can just, recite some incantation and now his curses go into effect. It's got to be coupled with the fact that he's casting his nasty gaze upon whatever it is that he's cursing. The only power that Bilam had is he's got to actually put his nasty eyes on the object of his derision, whatever it is that he's trying to curse. The zu haisa kavanas balak leviu alav. And that's why he said, you got to come here and let's see him from this vantage point, see Bnei Israel from this angle, from this angle, from this angle. Maybe now you'll be able to get him. Somehow or another, the whole koach, the whole power of Bilam in cursing, yeah, he had to know the moment. Like the Gemara says, he has to know the moment that God's upset. But even by knowing the moment that God's upset, it has to be coupled with the fact that he's going to look upon the object of whatever it is that he's cursing. It's got only then would his curse have any effect. So yeah, you're right. It could be a longer curse. That's true. But even with in the second answer of Tosos, it could be a longer curse. But even with the longer curse, it's got to be that his eyes were set on it too, and that's how he's answering this. So now it comes out very nice. It comes out again back to the question. Baruch Halevi Epstein, Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein's question was, why did he have to schlep him out of Midian and bring him here, come look at him from this vantage point? So the first answer is what Rav Shmuel David Walken said. And that's very cool because again, he's taking the whole koach, the whole power of Bilam in the Gemara and Brachos is he knows how to detect the very moment that God's upset. And that's a minuscule moment. How much damage could you do in that moment? Tosa says, all you get is the word kalem. Okay, that means you have to think, how can I be effective with just the word kalem, not saying anything more, not having to say their name? The only way to do that is you have to be looking at them. That's Tosas's first answer. Tosas' second answer, and how we'll answer Baruch Halevi Epstein's question, is as follows. His second answer says, is that, you know what? That moment could be dragged on a little bit longer, and the curse could go a little bit longer. But you know why? And you're right. Technically speaking, you could say Kalem li Yisrael, and that would be effective too. So then why did he have to see them? He had to see them because the second answer is the whole koach, the entire power of Bilam. What could make his curses effective is if he would put his nasty gaze on the object. So only if his powers are limited to what he can see, what he can rest his gaze upon. Now we understand why he had to be there. So now we have two ways to answer this question, and it'll work according to either answer of Tosos. The first answer of Tosos, which says you only have an absolute minuscule moment, it has to be there because that's the only way you could just say Kalem without having to say Li Yisrael and still be effective. The second answer, it says you got more, so no, you got a longer period of time. So why do we have to see them? You have to see them in order for his curse to be effective to put to put them. Why did it work that way? I don't know, but that's how the Zohar seems to be understanding that Mishnah and Avos that says that the koach, the power that he had, it becomes powerful of his cursing when he's able to lay his eyes on what it is that he's trying to curse. And it says he wants to suggest Balak understood that, and then because he understood that, that's why he wanted to do this. Those are two answers. I'll just, we don't have time, but I'll just speak it outside. He does offer one more answer to this. And what he offers one more answer is as follows. Another idea of why he wanted to see them is as follows. He says, he brings down, we saw this in a previous parsha, that it says that after Aaron died, it says that the Jewish people were attacked by the Canaanim. And Rashi there explains the Medrash says a little more. It doesn't like clearly identify. It says Yoshvei HaNegev, the people who lived in the south, and it said it was the Amalek. Amalek, they were the ones who attacked again, but they came out dressed up like Canaanim because they wanted to confuse the Jewish people. They were nervous the Jews are going to, if they were clearly identified as Canaanim, as Amalekim rather, then they were nervous. The Jews are going to daven to Hashem, save us from the Amalekim, and they'll be successful. But if they come out dressed up, not as Canaanim, but wearing the tribal getup of whatever that was of Canaanim, that'll confuse their stuff. But how did the Jews outsmart them? The Jews outsmarted them. This is in Parshas Chukas where this happened. How did the Jews outsmart them? The Jews outsmarted them by just saying, save us from whoever these people out. Like they just said, it says there, the Jews went ahead and they said, Amzeh, save us from Amzeh, from this nation. You can only say Amzeh if they're right in front of you and you're pointing at them. So he wants to say here in a similar vein, he wasn't sure, and there's a Rashi in this parsha that says this as well, he wasn't sure which name should you use in cursing them. Do you call them Bnei Yaakov or do you call them Bnei Yisrael? Because there's times where, Hashem changed his name from Yaakov to Yisrael, but they're still called out. So he's not sure exactly how to do that. So the most effective way to curse them would be to, again, refer to them as Amzeh. But to say Amzeh, you also have to be standing right there and pointing at them. So that's another answer that he gives, and that's kind of independent of that could work according to both answers of Tosos, as well as say just another reason as to why it might be that it was so important that Bilam be present and that he be gazing down upon them. That's another answer that he offers as well. But be that as it may, I found this fascinating for a number of reasons. Reason number one is just, as I said, there was corroboration here. Again, I had seen this in only one spot, this biographical detail that Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein was killed by the Nazis. I'd never seen that before. But again, because of the fact that he's referred to when Sorotskin quotes him as Hey Yud Dalet Hashem Yikom Damav, which is the appellation that's always given for a martyr, that seems to confirm that. But then also, I just felt very good about a second point. I felt very good about figuring out what was going on here. I initially thought this meant that he had personally had a conversation with Baruch Levi Epstein, and he says, no, this is what my nephew had and reported back to me. And then I did some digging because I had to see who's his nephew. And I said, now it makes sense. His nephew lived in Pinsk, and that's where Baruch Levi Epstein lived, was in Pinsk. And then what I thought was, okay, I was bothered by the question. That only works according to the first answer of Tosos. What about the second? And then I saw that this whole conversation is brought down by Rav Baruch Levi Epstein himself. He was bothered by that question, and then he offered a suggestion that could even work according to the second answer of Tosos. I thought that was incredible, and I got a lot of enjoyment out of that. And I think it to me that's it's I don't want to say it's fun, but it's rewarding when it's fun. When rewarding when you kind of like dig and you're able to connect some dots and help reassemble something which may have been a little bit hazy beforehand and put it together, reconstruct what happened here. Now we know the backstory behind this, what we find in this sefer here. We know the backstory. Who provided Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein with this creative answer that he said was Derech Drash? It was the nephew of Rav Sorotskin here, because he's got that in a letter from there. So I thought this was just very fascinating to see it, to put this all together.
Comes from, where does it come from? Is it our
Oh, so it sounds like Bilam had this power. He was gifted this some level of prophecy. The Gemara says, or I don't remember if it was the Gemara or the Medrash, it basically says God wanted to make sure that the nations of the world wouldn't have a complaint against him. That the nations of the world wouldn't say to God, you know why we never amounted to much was because of the fact you never gave us someone who had the gift of prophecy. If you gave us someone who had the gift of prophecy, like you gave the Jews Moshe, then we would have all been on the straight and narrow. And God says, okay, I'll give you someone and let's see what happens. So he gives them Bilam. Bilam has the gift of prophecy, but what does he do with it? He uses it to try to figure out, how can I be a mercenary of doom? Basically, how can I be someone I'll figure out, I'll be able to be sensitive to when God's upset with different people, different nations, issue curses at that point, and now I can hire myself out. I'm going to be the most potent military force that's out there. And Rashi alludes to this too in the parsha, because he says when he's dealing with Balak, he says, I'm worth whatever money you've got in your bank account, because you could take all that money and hire armies. You can hire, mercenaries. Maybe they'll win, maybe they won't win. But I got a gift here that's gold, and basically I'm worth whatever I really want to ask. So he's hiring himself out with this skill. So here it is. He's given this skill, but instead of using it to elevate anyone and to bring anyone up, he's using it as for destructive reasons. And he uses this at the end of the parsha to give them a tip. Oh, you want a tip how you'll beat the Jews? I do also know that God hates Zima. He hates immorality. So if you want to get God to turn against them, send your daughters out to cavort with them, and that'll bring up doom and gloom for the Jews there. So he's saying like, okay, he gifted them with some prophecy, and instead of using it for anything positive, he tries to use it for negative. He figured out how I can use this gift to be the ultimate cursor for money, and that's what he was doing with this. And he brought all sorts of immorality to regions where it didn't exist before. So he's really a pathetic story. The Gemara says it's also very interesting about Bilam. It basically gives license. Any darshan, anyone who wants to come up with some homiletical reason or reading of the Torah that makes Bilam look even worse, go for it. You can't say enough bad about Bilam. That's basically what the Gemara says. Like, he was such a rotten character in the eyes of Chazal. Like, there's just no limits. You want to make him look even, come up with a way to make him look worse, make him look even more nefarious. Like, there's just no limits. That's how low in estimation they had of him there. But anyhow, I just thought this was just fascinating to see this confluence of sources there.
It's always.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, yeah. It's
That's
fun when
interesting.
you're like researching something and you find links and you can find and put a puzzle together. And here I kind of felt like we put a little bit of a puzzle together.
Like these great Rishonim, so, you get the same mindset.
So let me stop the recording.